The computer screen seemed to freeze. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the private banking lounge moved. The young banker's eyes went wide, darting between the monitor and the elderly woman sitting across from her desk. The millionaire in the Armani suit, the one who'd been smirking just moments ago, went pale. Eleanor Mitchell, 78 years old, sat perfectly still in her worn cardigan and sensible shoes, her weathered handbag resting on her lap. She'd simply asked to check her account balance. A reasonable request. But the way she'd been treated when she walked in, the dismissive glances, the barely concealed impatience, the condescending tones, suggested everyone assumed she was wasting their time. Marcus Whitfield, sitting 3 chairs down waiting for his own advisor, had actually laughed out loud when Eleanor mentioned she needed to review her portfolio. He'd leaned over to his associate and whispered something that made them both chuckle. Poor old lady. Probably has a few thousand in savings bonds. Doesn't even know how a real investment account works. But now the screen had loaded. And the number displayed there with all those zeros made it very clear that Eleanor Mitchell knew exactly how investment accounts worked. She knew better than any of them. Before we get into this incredible story, if you're already hooked, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you love stories about assumptions being shattered and underdogs coming out on top, make sure you subscribe, because we've got plenty more where this came from. Seriously, what happened next in that bank? Nobody saw it coming, especially not Marcus. Now let's dive into how this all went down. Eleanor Mitchell had learned a long time ago that people see what they expect to see. And when a 78-year-old woman walks into a private wealth management firm wearing a 20-year-old cardigan, comfortable shoes from a discount store, and carrying a handbag that's seen better days, people expect to see someone who doesn't belong. She noticed it the moment she walked through the polished glass doors of Sterling Private Wealth Management. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly, the kind of micro-expression that said, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The security guard's eyes tracked her a little longer than necessary, as if she might be lost or confused. Eleanor wasn't lost. She knew exactly where she was. She'd been a client at Sterling for 43 years, longer than most of the current staff had been alive. But she came in so rarely, maybe once every few years, that nobody recognized her. And her appearance certainly didn't scream, "Valued client." "Can I help you?" The receptionist's tone was polite, but carried that subtle edge of doubt. "Yes, I have an appointment with my account manager, Eleanor Mitchell." The receptionist typed into her computer, and Eleanor watched the woman's eyebrows rise slightly. There it was, the first hint that maybe this elderly woman wasn't what she appeared to be. But old habits die hard, and the receptionist's professional mask stayed in place. "Of course, Ms. Mitchell, Jessica Chen will be with you shortly. Please have a seat in our private client lounge." The lounge was everything you'd expect from a firm managing billions in assets. Leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Abstract art on the walls. A coffee station with beans that were definitely not from Folgers. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. And sitting in one of those expensive chairs was Marcus Whitfield. Marcus was 47 and looked like money. Perfectly tailored Armani suit in charcoal gray. Swiss watch that cost more than a luxury car. Hair styled with that casual precision that actually required significant effort and expense. He was on his phone, speaking loudly enough that everyone in the lounge could hear. About his 7-figure portfolio adjustment and his concern about the European markets. Marcus liked people knowing he was wealthy. It was part of his identity, his self-worth. He'd made his money in tech, got in early with a startup that eventually sold to Google for an obscene amount. He was worth maybe $12 million, and he made sure everyone knew it. Eleanor sat down 3 chairs away from Marcus, setting her worn handbag on her lap. She didn't pull out a phone or a tablet. Just sat quietly, hands folded, waiting. Marcus glanced at her, then away. Then back again, a small frown creasing his forehead. What was she doing here? This was a private wealth management lounge, not a place for someone who looked like they should be clipping coupons at the grocery store. His associate, Derek, leaned in and whispered something. Marcus smirked, nodding. Jessica Chen appeared a few minutes later. She was young, maybe 30, sharp and professional in her tailored suit. Ms. Mitchell, I'm so sorry for the wait. Please, come with me. Eleanor stood slowly. Her knees weren't what they used to buy and followed Jessica to a private office. Behind her, she heard Marcus mutter something to Derek that ended with both men chuckling. Let them laugh, Eleanor thought. She'd learned decades ago that other people's assumptions were their problem, not hers. Jessica's office was smaller than the senior partner's, but still impressive. Mahogany desk, 2 monitors, that same expensive taste in furniture. Jessica gestured to a chair, and Eleanor sat down with a small sigh of relief. Standing too long made her hip ache. Now, Ms. Mitchell, I see from our records that it's been almost 4 years since your last visit. I don't like to meddle, Eleanor said simply. I trust you people know what you're doing with investments. That's why I pay you. Jessica smiled, though there was something slightly nervous in it. She'd pulled up Eleanor's file, but she hadn't opened the full portfolio yet. Of course. So what brings you in today? I'd like to see my current balance, please. All accounts? I'm thinking about making some changes. Certainly. Let me just pull that up for you. Jessica's fingers moved across the keyboard. Eleanor watched her, patient and calm. She'd waited for years. She could wait another few seconds. What Eleanor didn't see was Marcus Whitfield walking past Jessica's office at that exact moment. His own appointment was running late, and he'd gotten bored waiting in the lounge. He was wandering, restless, when he happened to glance through Jessica's glass door and see Eleanor sitting there. Marcus paused. Then, because he was Marcus and impulse control had never been his strong suit, he leaned against the doorframe and knocked lightly. Excuse me, Jessica. When you're done helping this lady? With her savings account, my advisor is still keeping me waiting. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. This lady, savings account. As if Eleanor was wasting valuable time that should be spent on real clients. Real money. Jessica's face flushed. Mr. Whitfield, I'm with a client right now. If you could please. Oh, I'm sure it won't take long. Marcus smiled at Eleanor with that particular brand of false friendliness wealthy people use when they're being patronizing. How much are we talking here? Few thousand. Maybe a CD that matured. Eleanor looked at him. Really looked at him. And in that moment, Marcus saw something in her eyes that made him slightly uncomfortable. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Just assessment. Like she was measuring him and finding him lacking. Young man, Eleanor said quietly, you should wait your turn. Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. Young man. That's cute. He looked at Jessica. Seriously though, how long is this going to take? Jessica's hands had frozen on her keyboard. She looked between Marcus and Eleanor, clearly torn between defending her client and not. Offending one of the firm's bigger accounts, Eleanor made the decision for her. Please pull up my balance, Jessica. I'd like to see it now. Jessica nodded, grateful for the clear direction. Her fingers moved across the keyboard again. She clicked. Waited for the system to load, and that's when everything changed. Eleanor Mitchell's story didn't start with wealth. It started with a young woman from Queens who married a postal worker named Robert Mitchell in 1967. She was 22. He was 25. They had $17 between them at the wedding reception. Robert worked his route 6 days a week. Eleanor took a job as a secretary at a law firm in Manhattan. They lived in a tiny apartment, shopped at discount stores, and saved every penny they could. Not because they had a grand plan. Just because that's what you did when you grew up during harder times. You saved. You were careful. You didn't waste. In 1972, Robert came home excited about something he'd read in the newspaper. A company called Intel was going public. Computer chips, the article said. The future of technology. Robert had always been interested in gadgets, in how things worked. He wanted to buy shares. Eleanor did the math. They had $847 in their savings account. Robert wanted to invest $500, more than half their safety net. It seemed reckless, dangerous even. But Eleanor had learned something working at that law firm. She'd learned that the partners, the wealthy ones, didn't keep their money under mattresses. They invested. They took calculated risks, and they got richer because of it, so she agreed. They bought Intel stock at $23.50 per share. 21 shares. And they held on to them. That decision changed everything over the next decade. As Intel grew and split and grew again, those shares multiplied. Robert and Eleanor didn't touch them. They lived on their salaries, kept saving, kept investing small amounts whenever they could. Robert read everything he could about investing. Eleanor, it turned out, had a gift for numbers and patterns. She'd study annual reports late at night, cross-referencing company performance with market trends, making notes in careful handwriting. By 1980, their portfolio was worth $47,000. By 1985, $230,000. They still lived in the same small apartment, still shopped carefully, still drove a used car. The only difference was that now they had options. Security, freedom. Robert died in 1998. Heart attack. Sudden and devastating. 56 years old. Eleanor was 53, alone, and suddenly solely responsible for a portfolio that had grown to $1.8 million. She could have sold everything. Could have lived comfortably on the proceeds. But Robert had taught her to think long-term, to be patient, to trust in good companies and good decisions. So Eleanor kept investing. She diversified tech stocks, real estate investment trusts, blue-chip companies, municipal bonds. She lived off Robert's modest pension and her own Social Security when she turned eligible. The investment accounts. Those just kept growing. She bought a small house in Queens in 2001, paid cash. $180,000. It was now worth over $600,000. But Eleanor didn't care about the value. It was home. She bought her clothes at discount stores, not because she had to, but because she genuinely didn't care about fashion. The cardigan she was wearing today, 12 years old, still perfectly functional. Why buy a new one? Her neighbors thought she was a sweet old lady living on a fixed income. The staff at her local grocery store knew her as the woman who always used coupons. Her church friends knew her as Eleanor, who volunteered every Tuesday at the food bank. Nobody knew that Eleanor Mitchell was worth $47.3 million. Nobody knew because Eleanor never told them. Never felt the need to tell them. Money to Eleanor wasn't about status or showing off. It was about security, options, the freedom to help people quietly when they needed autonomous donations to the food bank. Scholarships for neighborhood kids. Medical bills paid for families struggling with healthcare costs. Eleanor had learned something important over the decades. True wealth wasn't about what you showed the world. It was about what you could do when nobody was watching. About the choices you had when crisis struck. About sleeping peacefully, knowing you'd never be desperate, never be vulnerable, never be at someone else's mercy. She came to Sterling Private Wealth Management maybe once every few years, usually when something major needed attention. The rest of the time, she let the professionals do their jobs. Her portfolio was diversified across multiple accounts: traditional investments, real estate holdings, venture capital funds that Robert would have loved, even some cryptocurrency that her advisor had. Suggested 3 years ago, that had multiplied 20 times over. The account managers who actually handled her money, the senior partners who worked with clients above the 10 million threshold, they knew who Eleanor Mitchell was. But they respected her privacy. They understood that some people accumulated wealth quietly, without fanfare, without the need for validation from strangers. Jessica Chen was relatively new. She'd been assigned some of the mid-level accounts while learning the ropes. Eleanor's file had crossed her desk a few weeks ago, and Jessica had done a double-take at the numbers. Then she'd seen the client photo, an elderly woman in a cardigan, and assumed there must be some mistake in the system. There was no mistake. Eleanor had called 2 days ago requesting an appointment. Jessica had scheduled it. Still slightly confused about why a woman with that kind of portfolio would be assigned to a junior advisor. She'd asked her supervisor, who'd smiled and said, "Ms. Mitchell prefers to keep a low profile. Just treat her like any other client." And Jessica, "Don't judge by appearances." Now, sitting in her office with Eleanor across from her and Marcus Whitfield making condescending comments from the doorway, Jessica was beginning to understand what her supervisor meant. Her computer was still loading. The system always took a few seconds when pulling up complete portfolio summaries, especially for complex accounts with multiple holdings. Jessica watched the progress bar creep across her screen. 80%. 90%. Eleanor sat quietly, hands folded, completely unruffled by Marcus's rudeness. She'd dealt with men like him her entire life. Men who assumed that appearance equaled worth. That confidence equaled competence. That volume equaled importance. She'd outlasted them all. Built more wealth than most of them would ever see. And she'd done it without ever raising her voice or demanding recognition. Marcus was still in the doorway, arms crossed, waiting with obvious impatience. "Seriously, Jessica, I don't mean to rush you," but the computer chimed. The screen refreshed, and Jessica Chen's entire face changed. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened slightly. She blinked twice, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something more reasonable. Then she looked at Eleanor with an expression that was equal parts shock and profound respect. "Ms. Mitchell," Jessica said, her voice slightly unsteady, "your current total portfolio value is—" She trailed off, turning the monitor slightly so Eleanor could see. The number displayed in bold at the top of the screen was impossible to miss. $47,384,392. 18. Marcus, still standing in the doorway, couldn't see the screen from his angle. But he could see Jessica's face. And he could see the way she was looking at Eleanor now, with polite patience. But with the kind of deference reserved for the truly wealthy. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Marcus Whitfield had built his entire identity around being the richest person in most rooms. It was a feeling he'd grown addicted to, that moment when people realized he had money. When their expressions shifted from casual to impressed. When suddenly they paid attention. But something about Jessica Chen's face right now made his stomach tighten with unease. "I'm sorry," Jessica was saying to Eleanor. Her voice completely different from a minute ago. "I apologize for the wait, Ms. Mitchell. As you can see, your portfolio has performed exceptionally well. The tech sector diversification you approved last quarter has yielded remarkable returns." Eleanor nodded calmly, leaning forward slightly to study the screen. "Good, and the real estate holdings. Appreciated by 11.3% across the portfolio. The commercial properties in Brooklyn are particularly strong right now." Marcus shifted in the doorway. Commercial properties, plural. His mind was racing, trying to reconcile what he was hearing with the woman he was looking at. The worn cardigan. The discount store shoes. The handbag that probably came from a thrift shop. "Excuse me," he said. his voice harder now. "What exactly are we talking about here?" Jessica looked up, and for the first time since Marcus had known her, there was something sharp in her expression. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm in the middle of a private client consultation. If you could please wait in the private client?" Marcus laughed, but it came out forced. "Come on, Jessica. This is clearly some kind of mix-up. Look at her." The words were out before he could stop them. And the second they landed, he knew he'd made a mistake. Eleanor turned in her chair, fixing Marcus with a gaze that was suddenly much harder than before. "Young man, I would suggest you leave now." "I'm just saying," Marcus continued, digging himself deeper. "You don't exactly look like a sterling private wealth client. This firm has minimum requirements. 7 figures, at least. So unless you've got $1 million sitting around, Mr. Whitfield." Jessica stood up, her face flushed with anger now. "You need to leave my office immediately." But Marcus had already seen it. Just a glimpse, just a flash of the monitor as Jessica stood. Numbers, a lot of numbers. More numbers than should be there for a savings account or a modest pension. His confidence wavered. "What? What was that number?" "That is none of your concern," Jessica said firmly. "Ms. Mitchell's account information is confidential." Eleanor made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Then she looked at Jessica and said something that changed the entire dynamic in the room. "It's all right, dear. Show him." Jessica hesitated. "Ms. Mitchell, I really don't think show him," Eleanor repeated, her voice gentle but firm. "I think this young man needs to learn something today." Jessica looked between them, clearly torn between client confidentiality and direct instruction from the client herself. Finally, she took a breath and turned the monitor so Marcus could see. For 3 full seconds, Marcus just stared. The number at the top of the screen didn't make sense. It had too many digits. Had to be a mistake, some kind of system error. Maybe someone had added an extra 0 or but. No. Below that main number were itemized holdings, stock portfolios, real estate investments, municipal bonds, venture capital positions. Each line item representing millions. Millions, Marcus's $12 million net worth. The number he'd been so proud of, the number he'd built his entire sense of self around. It was less than 1/4 of what this elderly woman in the discount cardigan had, sitting in just her liquid accounts. That can't be. His voice came out as a whisper. 47.3 million, Eleanor said calmly. Give or take a few $100,000, depending on how the markets closed today. The room went silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang. Outside the window, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Jessica cleared her throat. Ms. Mitchell has been a client with Sterling for 43 years. One of our longest-standing and most valued relationships. Marcus couldn't speak. His mind was racing through every assumption he'd made in the last 20 minutes. Every condescending comment. Every dismissive glance. Every moment of smug superiority. All of it based on a cardigan and comfortable shoes. "I don't." He struggled to form words. "How did you?" Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "How did I what?" "Accumulate wealth. I started with 21 shares of Intel in 1972. I lived below my means. I invested wisely. I didn't waste money on expensive suits or luxury watches." Her eyes flicked meaningfully to Marcus's wrist. "And I certainly didn't spend my time telling other people how much money I had." The dig landed perfectly. Marcus felt his face burning. "I'm going to ask you something," Eleanor continued, her voice still gentle, but carrying an edge now. "When you walked past this office, when you saw me sitting here, what did you assume?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. No answer he could give would sound good. "You assumed I was poor?" Eleanor answered for him. You assumed I didn't belong here? You assumed that because I'm old and I dress simply, I must not be worth your time or respect. I didn't mean yes, you did. Eleanor's voice was firm now. That's exactly what you meant. You measured my worth by my appearance. By my age. By your own shallow definition of what wealth looks like. Jessica had stepped back, letting this play out. Down the hall, footsteps approached. Someone had noticed the commotion. Ms. Mitchell. A new voice from the doorway. Marcus turned to see Richard Sterling himself, the senior managing partner. The man who'd founded this firm 40 years ago. I heard you were here. I'm so sorry I wasn't available to greet you personally. Richard Sterling didn't even glance at Marcus. His entire focus was on Eleanor, and his expression held genuine warmth and respect. Richard, Eleanor smiled. The first real smile Marcus had seen from her. No need to apologize. Jessica has been perfectly wonderful. Richard nodded to Jessica, who looked relieved. Then his eyes finally landed on Marcus. Mr. Whitfield, I think you have an appointment waiting in conference room 3. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. Marcus wanted to defend himself. Wanted to explain. Wanted to somehow undo the last 20 minutes and start over with different assumptions. Different behavior. But there was nothing to say. He'd revealed exactly who he was. And everyone in this room had seen it. Right? He muttered. Sorry for the interruption. He left his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. His $12 million feeling suddenly very, very small. Behind him, he heard Richard Sterling say something to Eleanor about lunch, about catching up. About a charitable foundation she'd been quietly funding for years, and Marcus Whitfield, walking down that hallway toward his own appointment, realized he'd just learned the most expensive lesson of his life, and it hadn't cost him a single dollar. Just his ego. Eleanor Mitchell watched Marcus Whitfield disappear down the hallway, his shoulders slightly hunched in a way they hadn't been 20 minutes ago. She felt no particular satisfaction in his humiliation. Just a quiet sense that maybe he'd think twice before judging someone by their appearance again. Richard Sterling settled into the chair Marcus had vacated. His 68 years sitting more comfortably on him than Marcus's 47 ever would. Eleanor, I do apologize for that unpleasantness. Don't, Eleanor said simply. Young people need to learn somehow. Better he learn it here than somewhere that actually costs him something important. Richard smiled. He'd known Eleanor since the early days, when she'd first walked into a small investment office in 1980 with Robert. Both of them nervous and excited about growing their modest portfolio. He'd watched them build something remarkable through discipline and patience. And after Robert died, he'd watched Eleanor continue that legacy with quiet determination. Your portfolio is in excellent shape, Richard said, glancing at Jessica's screen. Though I have to ask, what brings you in after all this time? You usually prefer to let us handle things remotely. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap, that familiar gesture that made her look like someone's gentle grandmother. Which she was, technically 2 grandchildren from her sister's side, though she'd never had children of her own. I want to make some changes, she said. I'm 78, Richard. I've been thinking about legacy, about what happens to all of this when I'm gone. Richard nodded slowly. You're in perfect health, from what I understand. For now, but none of us know how long we have. And I've realized something. I've been so focused on building and preserving this wealth that I've forgotten why wealth matters in the first place. Jessica, still standing near her desk, was listening intently. This was the kind of conversation they didn't teach you about in finance courses. I want to set up a foundation, Eleanor continued, something that helps people like I used to be. Working families. People who are trying to save, trying to build something, but who don't have access to good financial education or investment opportunities. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Robert and I, we got lucky. We bought Intel because Robert read an article and got excited. But luck only took us so far. The real difference was that I had time to learn. I could read those annual reports late at night. I could study market patterns. But so many people are working 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. They don't have time to learn about investing. They can't afford to take risks. Elena's voice grew stronger, more passionate than Jessica had heard before. I want to create a program that teaches financial literacy to working-class families, that provides micro-investment opportunities with professional guidance, that helps people build wealth the way Robert and I did, slowly, carefully, with support. Richard was already nodding. That's a beautiful vision, Eleanor. I'm thinking 20 million to start. Is that enough? Jessica actually gasped. 20 million. Said as casually as someone might say $20, Richard didn't even blink. That would create something substantial. Something lasting good. Eleanor reached into her worn handbag and pulled out a folder. Inside were handwritten notes, ideas she'd been developing over the past year. Plans for curriculum. Partnerships with community colleges. Outreach to underserved neighborhoods. She'd done her homework, just like she always did. I want it to be anonymous, she added. No buildings with my name on them. No plaques. Just help. Real help for people who need it. Richard took the folder, scanning her notes with growing admiration. Eleanor, this is remarkable. You've thought of everything. I've had a lot of time to think. She smiled. And here's the thing, Richard. I've been happy. Truly happy. And it had nothing to do with having $47 million. I was happy when Robert and I had $847. I was happy when we bought our first house. I'm happy now. She gestured vaguely toward the hallway where Marcus had disappeared. That young man out there. He has $12 million, and I doubt he's ever been truly happy a day in his life. Because he thinks wealth is about showing people you have it. About being superior. About winning. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. But wealth is about freedom. About security. About having options when life gets hard. And if you're fortunate enough to have more than you need, it's about helping others find that same freedom. Jessica found herself blinking back tears. This wasn't what she'd expected when she'd scheduled a routine account review. Richard stood, extending his hand. I'll have our foundation specialists draw up the paperwork. We should be able to have everything structured within a month. Eleanor shook his hand. Thank you, Richard, for everything. For 43 years of trust and good advice. The pleasure has been entirely ours. As Eleanor gathered her handbag and prepared to leave, Jessica rushed around the desk. Ms. Mitchell, I just want to say, what you're doing is incredible. And I'm sorry if I seemed surprised earlier when you first came in. I should have. Eleanor held up a hand gently. Dear, you were perfectly professional. And you had no reason to know who I was. That's rather the point, isn't it? She patted Jessica's arm. Here's something I learned a long time ago. The people who look like they have money, often, don't have as much as they want you to think. And the people who actually have money often don't need you to know it. We're comfortable with who we are. She started toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Jessica, that young man who is just here. If he comes back with questions about what he saw today, client confidentiality applies. He doesn't need to know the details. He just needs to remember the lesson. Jessica nodded. Understood, Ms. Mitchell. Eleanor walked out of Sterling Private Wealth Management the same way she'd walked in, slowly. Carefully, in her comfortable shoes and worn cardigan. The security guard held the door for her, and this time his expression was different. Word had already spread. The unassuming elderly woman was actually one of their biggest clients. Outside, the Manhattan afternoon was crisp and bright. Eleanor stood for a moment on the sidewalk, breathing in the city air. Watching people rush past with their coffee cups and designer bags and worried faces, she thought about Marcus Whitfield, probably sitting in his conference room right now, his world slightly rearranged. She hoped he learned something. Hoped he'd think about that moment the next time he judged someone by their appearance. But even if he didn't, Eleanor had planted a seed. $20 million worth of seeds. Actually, that would grow into opportunities for families who reminded her of herself and Robert 50 years ago. That was worth more than any amount of money in any account. Eleanor hailed a cab she'd never seen the point in owning a car. In the city, Yan gave the driver her address in Queens. As they pulled into traffic, she pulled out her phone. Not a smartphone. Just a simple flip phone that made calls and sent texts. She had a text from her friend Margaret. Still on for bridge tonight. Eleanor smiled and typed back slowly. Wouldn't miss it. Because that was the thing about real wealth. It didn't change what mattered. Friends, community, simple pleasures like Tuesday bridge games and Sunday services and volunteering at the food bank. The money was just there. A tool, a resource, a way to help and protect and create opportunities. It wasn't who she was. It was just what she had. And somewhere in a private wealth management office in Manhattan, a young banker named Jessica Chen was learning that lesson. And a middle-aged millionaire named Marcus Whitfield was learning it too. The screen had loaded. The truth had been revealed. And Eleanor Mitchell, 78 years old, wearing a cardigan that cost $12, went home to her modest house in Queens, worth $47 million, and absolutely okay with nobody knowing.